Mick was the best lawyer in Los Angeles, known for his incredible intelligence. One morning, as he arrived at court to handle a case, his colleague Val informed him about a new job offer: to be the lawyer for Louis, the son of a wealthy man who was currently in jail for assault. If Mick took the case, he would be paid a huge sum of money. Without hesitation, Mick agreed to the offer. Before the trial began, Mick went to meet his client, who was still in prison. Mick's client was a motorcycle gang leader. During their meeting, Mick complained about the payment he hadn't yet received. The gang leader reassured Mick that the payment would be made soon. Once the trial started, Mick asked the judge to postpone the trial for 1 month, so he could gather more witnesses and evidence. The judge granted his request. However, the gang leader was frustrated that the trial was delayed, as he wanted to be released from prison quickly. Mick, staying calm, responded that if the leader wanted to be released sooner, he had to pay the full amount. After the trial, Mick was driven to the police station where his new client, Louis, was being held. On the way, a gang of bikers started following his car. Mick remained calm and told his driver to stop. One of the gang members, who had a fierce face, approached Mick and asked for his help in getting their leader out of jail as soon as possible. "Come on, it's not always about money. Remember, we're like family," said the gang member. This motorcycle gang had used Mick's legal services every time they had legal troubles. After negotiating, Mick received a payment of $10,000 and promised to get their leader out by the following month.
Now they keep me round doing my thing. They keep me flowing and constantly with no worries out there. It's not my concern. You wanna.
When Mick finally arrived at the police station, he met Louis and confirmed he would take on his case. Louis was relieved and nervously explained that he had been framed and had never assaulted anyone. Mick calmed Louis down and advised him to speak quietly so no one else, especially his cellmate, could hear. During trial preparations, Mick successfully convinced the judge to change Louis's status from a prison inmate to a city detainee. However, Louis had to wear an ankle tracker to prevent him from fleeing the country. Louis's trial was scheduled for the following week. After court, Mick met Louis's mother's assistant outside the courthouse. The assistant asked if Mick could really get Louis free. Mick confidently replied, "Never underestimate the best lawyer in the country."
Don't sweat the technique. Not now, it'll take a while. I script so they can't get filed. Now check the style, affect the file. Let's see who bit the die. Sweat the technique. Mixing out, stay on target and refuse underground sound.
There he is. Thank you, Sticks.
Anytime.
Come eat Sticks. It's Jim.
Where we headed now?
The next day, Mick and his assistant Frank visited Louis's mother at her office. They were greeted by Louis, his mother, and her assistant. Before the meeting started, Mick asked Louis's mother to leave the room, stating that his client was Louis, not her. Louis's mother was visibly annoyed but left. Mick allowed her assistant to stay, as she was now Louis's personal assistant. During the meeting, Louis explained the events of the night in question. He said that he was drinking at a bar when a woman named Regina, who worked as a sex worker, approached him and gave him a note with her address and rates. After she left, Louis, mesmerized by her beauty, followed the address. When he arrived at her apartment, he saw that Regina was still with the man from the bar, whom Louis referred to as Mustang Guy. Louis waited in the parking lot until the man left. Once the man was gone, Louis went to Regina's apartment and knocked on the door. At first, she welcomed him warmly, but as soon as he entered, he was suddenly hit from behind and knocked unconscious. When he woke up, the police had arrived and arrested him for allegedly assaulting Regina, whose face was bruised and beaten. After hearing this, Mick asked Frank to compare Louis's story with the police report. Frank showed Mick photos from the crime scene and read the police statement. According to Regina, when she opened the door, Louis attacked her, trying to assault her. Fortunately, she managed to defend herself and hit Louis with a bottle, knocking him out. Mick sensed something odd in Regina's story and started doubting her. After a long conversation with Louis, Mick was convinced his client had been framed. Later that night, Mick and Frank discussed the case over drinks. Mick was puzzled. If Louis had been unconscious, then who had beaten up Regina? Suspecting Mustang Guy, Mick asked Frank to investigate further. The next morning, Frank returned with CCTV footage from the bar. It showed Regina with Mustang Guy, who was left-handed. Mick's suspicions grew stronger, believing that the bruises on Regina's right cheek were caused by a left-handed punch. Mick decided to share this information with the prosecutor, hoping they would drop the charges. However, even after seeing the footage, the prosecutor insisted on pursuing the case and wanted to sentence Louis to 7 years in prison. Mick knew something wasn't right. That afternoon, Mick and Frank reviewed the documents from the prosecutor. Mick was shocked to learn that a knife with Louis's name engraved on it had been found at the crime scene. Furious, Mick stormed to confront Louis. He showed him the photo of the knife and angrily asked why Louis hadn't mentioned it when he was asked to tell the full story. Louis finally confessed that he had brought the knife to Regina's apartment, but not to hurt her. He explained that ever since his mother had been assaulted in the past, he carried the knife everywhere to protect her. Still upset, Mick walked away without saying anything else. The next day, Mick bumped into the police chief. 3 years ago, Mick and the chief had worked together on a case involving the murder of a sex worker. Although the suspect had been jailed, Mick always doubted if the right person had been convicted or if they had been framed. Later that evening, Mick met his ex-wife, Maggie, at a bar to relax. Maggie, also a lawyer, remained on good terms with Mick for the sake of their young daughter. Though they had divorced, it was clear they still had feelings for each other. The next morning, as Mick examined Regina's medical photos, he realized her bruises were eerily similar to those in the murder case he had worked on 3 years earlier. Mick's guess is right. The wounds are exactly the same. The criminal must be the same person. Mick then remembered his former client, Martinez, who had been framed for that crime. Mick began to suspect that the cases were connected. Convinced of a link, Mick visited Martinez in prison that afternoon. At first, Martinez refused to talk, still traumatized by the case. But after Mick pleaded with him, Martinez finally agreed to retell his story. He mentioned that before leaving the bar that night, he saw the victim greeting another man. Mick showed Martinez a photo of Louis and asked if this was the man. The moment Martinez saw Louis's face, he became agitated and started shouting. It confirmed Mick's suspicion. Louis was the real murderer from 3 years ago, and Martinez had been framed. Enraged, Mick shared the discovery with Frank, feeling deceived by Louis. However, as a lawyer, Mick was bound by the attorney-client privilege and couldn't report Louis to the police. Even worse, if Mick's accusations were rejected, it would strengthen Louis's position in the future, making it harder to convict him of any crime. That night, Mick returned home and called Maggie to check on their daughter, but when he arrived, he found his door unlocked.
How's Haley?
Inside, he was startled to see Louis waiting for him. Calmly, Louis revealed that he knew Mick had visited Martinez in prison. He confessed to the murder 3 years ago and said his story about Regina was a lie. Louis then asked, "So what now?" "You can't report me. We're bound by attorney-client privilege." Before leaving, Louis subtly threatened Mick's daughter, asking questions about her school and age, implying that he could hurt her. The next morning, Louis's first trial began. Both sides were there to introduce themselves to the jury. The prosecutor gave an opening speech trying to portray Louis as guilty. Mick, staying calm and professional, gave his speech in defense of Louis, showing no sign of the tension between them. Later that day, while watching his daughter's soccer game, Mick was approached by Maggie. She was holding back tears as she informed him that Frank had been found dead, shot to death.
Listen, slow down a second. Slow down. So you've been here before?
The police detective said they didn't know who the shooter was yet. Mick remained silent, pretending not to know, but deep down, he was certain it was Lewis's doing. Angry and guilt-ridden, Mick lashed out at Val, his colleague who first introduced him to Louis.
Man, are you nuts? You and Frank would defend him. Why would he take Frank out?
Because you lied to me.
Okay.
Rulé killed Frank. Val.
Nobody can beat the tracer, huh?
It was him. You lied to me once.
What is Rulé?
Killed Frank. Taking it off him.
A few days later, the detective called Mick again, informing him that the bullet used to kill Frank came from an old, rare type of gun. The police were tracking down everyone in the country who owned that kind of weapon. Mick realized that Louis had stolen his old pistol and was trying to frame him for the murder. As the trial continued, the prosecutor called Mustang Guy to the witness stand. Mustang Guy testified that he had been with Regina briefly that night and then left, not knowing how Regina got injured. Mick skillfully questioned the witness and asked if he was left-handed. When Mustang Guy confirmed this, Mick pointed out that the bruises on Regina's right cheek matched a punch from a left hand. The jury began to doubt Mustang Guy's story. After the trial session, the detective approached Mick with a search warrant. Mick was now a suspect in Frank's murder. During the search at his house, the police found a box for a pistol that matched the type used in the crime. However, Mick calmly explained that his pistol had been stolen, and he didn't know who had taken it. Fortunately, because of their long relationship, the detective trusted Mick's story. That afternoon in a cafe, Mick's assistant arrived with a list of witnesses that the prosecutor would present in court. When Mick found out that a prisoner named Corliss would testify, he was pleased. Corliss was known as a prisoner often hired to give false testimony in various trials. Coincidentally, Corliss was also sharing a cell with Lewis. Mick then asked his assistant to bribe Corliss. When the prosecutor called Corliss to testify, he would also expose all of Lewis's crimes. Mick also asked his assistant to invite the detective and the police chief to witness Corliss's testimony. Mick would take care of the rest. The next day, during the trial, the prosecutor called the main victim, Regina, to testify. After the prosecutor finished asking questions, it was Mick's turn. Using his skills, Mick asked Regina various questions until she became emotional. Mick started building the idea that Regina was trying to frame Lewis and extort his wealth, because Louis was the son of a wealthy man. In a short time, Mick successfully twisted the facts, making the jury start doubting Regina's statements. She could only hold back her tears. In reality, Regina had truly been beaten by Louis, but Mick made it seem as though Regina was the villain. After Regina's testimony ended, it was Mick's turn to present his witness. Mick brought Lewis's mother to testify. When the prosecutor asked about the knife that belonged to Louis, which was found at the crime scene, Lewis's mother explained that she was the one who asked Lewis to carry the knife for protection. Her answer was convincing, and she even spoke while crying, which made everyone in the room feel touched. When they left court, Mick reminded Louis that tomorrow would be the final trial where Louis would testify. He warned Louis not to make any mistakes while speaking. The next day, the final trial began. Louis stepped forward to testify in front of the jury. With tears in his eyes, Lewis explained what had happened that night. Louis insisted that he had been framed. He asked the jury to look back at the previous witnesses who had raised doubts. He begged them not to punish him, saying he was still very young and his future could be ruined. Hearing this, the jury seemed to feel pity for him. After finishing his testimony, Lewis initially felt confident that they would win the trial. However, the prosecutor hadn't given up yet. Before the judge could make a decision, the prosecutor requested the trial be extended for one more day, as he had one final witness to present. The judge agreed to the prosecutor's request. The next day, the prosecutor introduced Corliss, Lewis's cellmate, as a new witness. Mick protested strongly, asking the judge to forbid Corliss from testifying, but the judge allowed it. Corliss began recounting how Lewis had confided in him in prison, admitting that he had beaten Regina and that, years ago, he had killed a sex worker. Lewis had cleverly framed another man, Martinez, for the crime. Hearing this, the police chief, who was present in the courtroom, was shocked and quickly left. Lewis panicked, insisting that Corliss was lying. But Mick, staying calm, pretended to be confused as well. In reality, everything was going according to Mick's plan. Mick wasn't just trying to convince the jury, his real target was the police chief and the detective. With the police chief gone, Mick began his cross-examination, using his skills to discredit Corliss, making his testimony seem unreliable. By the time Mick was finished, Corliss looked unsure of himself, and his story no longer seemed trustworthy. During a recess, Louis confronted Mick in the bathroom, furious. He accused Mick of planning to betray him. Mick simply smiled and walked away, leaving Louis fuming. When court resumed, the judge declared that Louis was not guilty of the assault. Mick had officially won the case, and Lewis was set free. Outside the courthouse, Louis's mother thanked Mick for getting her son out of trouble. But suddenly the police chief returned and arrested Lewis for the murder of the sex worker from 3 years ago. Lewis's mother was shocked. Mick approached Lewis and quietly said, "Never underestimate the best lawyer in the country." As Louis was taken away, the detective approached Mick, clearly impressed. He realized that Mick had only pretended to defend Louis so he could trap him for the murder. Mick had purposely won the assault case to give himself the opportunity to bring down Louis for the far more serious crime of murder. Later, as Mick was driving home, his driver handed him a gun for protection, congratulating him on another successful case.
Only at the top, and we're invincible. No plan is foolproof. Problems come near, don't fear. Things get severe. Seems that life is just a constant war between me, my moment of truth.
Be careful, all right?
When Mick arrived home, he received a phone call from Maggie. She frantically told him that Lewis had been released again, as the police still didn't have enough evidence to hold him. Mick quickly told Maggie to take their daughter and hide at her mother's house. He knew that Lewis was likely on his way to find them. Suddenly, Mick remembered that Louis was still wearing an ankle monitor. He immediately called Val and asked him to track Lewis's location.
Now, it's about my family. No, he's not going to my house, Val. No.
It's me. Just shot past the street. He's not headed for your house. Hello. Oh, you're welcome.
When Louis arrived at Maggie's house, Mick was already there, standing at the front door, waiting with a gun in hand. Mick calmly told Lewis to leave and warned him not to come near his family. But Lewis, arrogant as ever, asked, "What are you going to do if I come back? Will you stay here every night, guarding the house? Or will you shoot me? If you hurt me, I'll just call the cops, and your career as a lawyer will be over." Despite the threats, Mick stayed calm. He said coldly, "I don't need to get my hands dirty to deal with you."
Hey! What are you doing? Boys, get up! Come on.
Hospital, not the morgue. Hey, Mags.
Where are you?
Just about home.
That night, when Mick returned to his home, He was shocked to find Louis's mother waiting for him inside. Like her son, she was clearly dangerous. But Mick, without losing his cool, told her to get out of his house.
Get the hell out of my house.
A few days later, Mick received good news. Martinez had finally been released from prison thanks to the new evidence. At the same time, the police had gathered enough proof to rearrest Louis for the murder that had happened 3 years ago. On his way home, Mick's car was once again stopped by the biker gang. He told his driver to stop the car. The gang leader approached Mick, asking for help again. One of their members had been arrested, not just for drugs, but also for having an affair with a police officer's wife. They asked how much Mick would charge this time. Mick smiled and replied, "For a loyal customer, this time it's free." The end. What do you think about this movie? Let us know on comment down below. If you enjoy this video, please like and make sure to subscribe to our channel so you won't miss out our next movie. That's all for today. See you on the next one.